All right, welcome back to Turnbull Garage. So today we're going to be carrying on with the Suzuki Carry engine rebuild. And as you saw in the last video, we got the head put back together. And more importantly, we had some issues where the connecting rod bearings weren't fitting. Today I'm happy to report I just got a set of connecting rod bearings, and these are the correct bearings. Not too sure actually what the problem is. I do know the correct bearings for this engine are 18 millimeters wide, and the other ones that I have are 16 millimeters wide. I could not find anything online that would tell me which goes with what, but I had the supplier measure these, and he sent them, and they're now the correct ones. So with that said, let's just get back to carrying where we left off and checking clearance on our connecting rod bearings. All right, so I've got my crank here, got my connecting rod. I'm gonna throw my bearings in here real quick. I don't have a lot of plastic gauge left. I'm running low. This will be my last little bit of it. I'm gonna have to get more. But like I say, to hold it in place, I'm just gonna put a little bit of engine assembly lube on here. This will hold the plastic gauge in place, and it also just prevents any scoring of my bearings on the crank here. So I'm just gonna take my plastic gauge, just break a little piece off. Stick it on there. Now, looking at the way this is orientated, again, this would be your exhaust side of the motor. Your lettering on your connecting rod needs to go to the intake side, so the lettering is here. So I'm going to be putting it this way, facing away, because that's the intake side of the engine, because you can picture how it goes in. So I'm going to be putting it on like this. So let's just... Okay, we'll try that again. Actually, I moved the plastic gauge over to the leading edge. Again, my connecting rod, I want the intake side with the letters, which will be this way. So I'll stick that on here. Match it up with the letters on this side. To make this easier, I'm going to tip this up like that. Okay, it's got that tightened up. Now I'll crack her loose. And the plastic gauge kind of moved on me a little bit, but I think I can still get a good reading. That is 2/1000 of an inch, which again is where we want to be. So that's good for number one. So now I'm going to go around and just do the rest of these bearings, and then I can permanently install the crankshaft, as long as these numbers are good, into the crankcase. Okay, so those all checked out good. They're at the very top end of the tolerance, however. They're 2/1000 of an inch, and I'm good with that. It's still within spec, so that's good. So the next thing to do is install the crank permanently. So I'm just going to put some assembly lube in here. Some people will use engine oil in here, and I find engine oil being as runny, it maybe won't stay. This stuff, with the assembly lube, it provides good lubrication for startup. When there isn't oil flowing, it'll keep the bearings lubricated until the engine starts. So anyway, I've already cleaned the journals up. So we'll drop this in here. And next thing I do is the thrust bearings. And they will roll into this one right here. Okay, I've got this zoomed in a bit. So you'll see on your crankshaft on this journal here, this is where the thrust bearings go. This thrust bearing has got one smooth side and one's got a couple of grooves in it. This is the side that you want to have against the crankshaft. This side is against the block. This has got the Babbitt material. So all you do is a little bit of assembly lube, And again, the slotted side towards the face of the crank, and then you just roll it in like that. Push my crank over, and then we'll put the next one in. All right, so with the thrust bearings in, the next thing to do is check end play. And I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's a little bit of end play. There needs to be. Nowhere in the book could I find a spec on this, but what I'm getting on this engine is 6/1000 of an inch seems to be the clearance. Now, I've done a few engines. That's a little on the high side. I'd like it to be probably closer to more like 4, but it is what it is. I can't find any spec in the book that says what it's supposed to be. 6/1000 of an inch is what it is. So with that in, the crank is in place. Oh, I just rolled my bearings out. I don't want to do that. The next thing I'll do is put the cap on, and before we do that, we're going to put some sealant around the face of this to seal the upper lower crankcase. All right, I've gone around and cleaned all the mating surfaces. So the next thing I'll do is put some gasket maker on here, some silicone. And you don't have to worry about getting way up into here. It's just to keep the oil from getting outside the crankcase from where the seal is here to this face here. Once you get into this area here, it's inside the timing cover. It doesn't matter. So all right, with that done, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube into these bearings on the other half of the main caps. One of my dowels is in here, the other dowels are in this girdle piece. So there we go. Put this in place. Okay, the next thing is the larger bolts. These get torqued down to 30 foot-pounds in a sequence. And then you loosen them in sequence, and then you tighten them back again to 30 foot-pounds, and then again to 42 foot-pounds. All right, that's torqued to 30 foot-pounds. I'm gonna loosen them all off in order. Again, tighten them back up to 30 foot-pounds, and then go around in sequence and tighten them to the final 42 foot-pounds. Okay, I actually tipped the motor over on its side. It was easier to torque them up. So with those all done, the next thing to do is install the small bolts here. These are just torqued again in your sort of normal tightening sequence that you would do to 212 inch-pounds. Okay, that's our bottom end tightened, torqued up, spins nicely. One thing you're going to want to do is remove any silicone that is squeezed out in this area here while it's wet, because you got to put your seal in here, otherwise you're going to have to cut it out when it cures, so you want to do that. The next thing we'll do is actually put this aside, and we're going to start putting the connecting rod and piston assemblies together. Okay, so next thing is the pistons onto the connecting rods. First thing I did was I took out my new wrist pins and I checked them in all rods, and the fit is perfect. It's a tight fit, but it will just slide through. And the next thing to figure out is which way the piston goes onto the connecting rod. So the reliefs cut out are on the intake side. There's also an arrow pointing to cylinder number 1. So if you put the piston on your connecting rod so that the reliefs are on the same side as your 2 ends stamped on your connecting rod, that will work. So that's how it's orientated onto your connecting rod. So first thing I'm gonna do is put a snap ring in each piston on one side so that I can just push the wrist pin through and then put the snap ring on the last one to finish it off. All right, so that was pretty easy. The one thing you want to do, you'll notice how I have my snap rings orientated so that the snaps are away from that little groove right there. You want to make sure that this part of the snap is not over here. You want to have these basically opposite. And you also want to be really sure that these snaps go in. Now, the original ones, I don't know if I still have them, they're not a circlip, they were just a little spring pin. And they were a little easier to go into the groove. This one, you want to make sure that your snap ring is fully seated inside that groove, because it can sit like this one here. I don't think that one's in quite. I'm gonna have to check that one. If you look at the distance between the two eyes on that one looks a little closer. So this one I don't think is in quite all the way, but you want to make sure of that. But anyway, the next thing to do on these is install the piston rings. Actually, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. The next thing we got to do is fit the rings to the cylinders. So what you do is you put the piston rings into the cylinders and you measure the end gap. That's got to be within a certain tolerance. So we're gonna have to do that for all these rings. It's quite a time-consuming process. Basically what I do is I do my top, middle, and bottom rings for a cylinder, install the piston rings on that piston, and then compress them and install them into the cylinder, and then repeat the process for the other pistons. And the reason you want to do that is because if you fit all the pistons or all the rings for one cylinder or get them mixed up, the cylinders, there could be some differences between the two, although they should be very close. But you want to make sure that the fitted piston rings go into that cylinder. All right, so I'm going to show you what's involved in doing this. So basically I've got my the top ring going into cylinder number 1. We're basically going to compress this ring till it just slides in. And then what you do is you take a piston and get the piston in there and just push it in a little bit. And what that does is it squares the ring up in the cylinder. So now I can measure that gap. So the top ring, the tolerance is 4.5 thousandths to 10.5 thousandths of an inch. So that looks like maybe around 5. Let's have a look. So I'll just take my feeler gauge, and 5 goes in there. Let's go to, so we already know it's not too tight because it's more than 4.5. 6 goes in. So we jump to 8. Let's jump to 8. Oh, 8 fits. Going to 9. That felt pretty tight though. I don't think 9's gonna fit. I think it's gonna be 8 thousandths of an inch. It barely fits. So there we go. We've got 9 thousandths of an inch. So it's 1.5 thousandths of an inch tighter than the tolerance. So that's good. We don't have to do any filing on those rings on that one. So we'll take this one out and go to ring number 2. So this is the next compression ring. Same cylinder. You always want to be really careful. You don't want to break one of these piston rings. That would not be fun. Square the rings up inside. And what's our tolerance? Quite generous actually, 13 to 19 thousandths of an inch. That's a lot. The little sandbar is much tighter. So 13 to 19, let's go with 13 because that looks tighter than 13. It is tighter than 13. So with that said, we're gonna probably have to take some of this ring off. 8 thou? No, 8 won't go. So that's 7 thousandths of an inch. It's too tight. Okay, so I know I need to take some out of this ring. The next one we're gonna check is the oil rings. And the tolerance on these is 4 thousandths of an inch to 15 thousandths of an inch. Same deal. These are a little easier because they're very small. Square it up. That looks quite tight. So let's go right to the bottom end, 4,000 7-inch. Yep, that fits. That's good. I think we're going to be fine with these. Let's go to 7. I don't think that's going to fit. Oh, it does. 7 fits. We got to go all the way to, there's a lot of tolerance on this. Let's go to 9. No, 9 won't fit. So I think it's right about 7. So that one's good. I suspect this one's going to be the same. 7 just fits. So there we go. So there's only one ring that we need to adjust, and that is the number 2, the middle ring. So I'm going to get some wet and dry paper, and what I do is I put it on a little block and just slide the one end back and forth and just sand some of it off until I get to my tolerance, and then I can install them on the pistons. All right, so all I've done here is I took just actually a little jeweler's file and carefully filed it down, and right now I am at, I can just squeeze a 15 thou feeler gauge in there. So 13.7 thousandths of an inch is the minimum. So we're just over that. The top is 19. So with that said, all the rings are good. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. So what we'll do now is install them on the number 1 piston. All right, so in the manual, looking at the top piston, the piston ring has got a bit of a chamfer on the top edge. On the number 2 cylinder, there's a chamfer on the outer side, on the bottom part, and then the oil ring, it doesn't matter, they're all the same. So typically what I've always done is the writing piston ring, see if I can get it on camera here. Piston rings have got writing on it, and you can see right there is a 50, so that's 50 over, and the writing usually goes on the top. If that's the case, then the little chamfer should be on the bottom, which it is. You can see it really well right there. So with that said, the numbers on the piston ring go to the top, and then for the top compression ring, see, has it got writing on it? Yes, it does. That should be going on the top. Now there should be a chamfer on the top edge, and yes, there is. You can see it there. So the writing is on the top. So that's how you know which way the piston rings go on. All right, so I got all the piston rings on. I don't have a ring expanding tool. I do it by hand. You just gotta be really careful not to break a ring. These little piston rings are pretty flexible, but they're also quite brittle, so you gotta be careful. I've done enough pistons and over the years, I've got the touch, I guess. But yeah, just be careful not to break a ring. The next thing to do is orientate the piston rings correctly. They have to be orientated. So if you look at here, I've drawn on this in the book here, the arrow basically pointing to number 1, the eyelets on here. That's the way it's explained. Number 8 is on the inlet side. So the oil control valve rings, which is the bottom ones, they are at number 9 and 12. So they're kind of on this side of the piston here and here. The number 2 ring, the first compression ring, or the second compression ring, I should say, is at number 10. So that's right about here. And the top compression ring is over here on the piston. So the next thing I'll do, I'll put a bunch of engine oil on here, put my ring compressor on, tighten it up, put some oil in the cylinder, and then we will install our first piston. All right, so I've got my piston rings orientated. They're all oiled. The next thing to do is put it into my piston ring compressor. I think I've got to open it up a bit more. The thing with these is you don't want to disturb the orientation of those rings. So you want to make sure you don't rotate anything when you're putting this together, tightening it up. There we go. So what I do is I leave it so that the skirts are just poking out a little bit, so it helps you guide in there. We're going to put a little bit of assembly lube. A little bit of assembly lube on there. And make sure our crankshaft is orientated the correct way. Like that. Last thing is throw some little rubber stops on your bolts here so you don't damage your crank. Actually, one more thing to do. Throw a bunch of oil in the cylinder. There you go. And also, again, the arrow pointing to number 1 cylinder. Slide that in there. There we go. Get my hammer. Make sure this is all square. And just a matter of tapping this thing in. Don't force it if it doesn't want to go. There we go. And that's going around the crank quite nicely, so I'll just tap this the rest of the way. Turn this around so you can see what I'm doing. So there, it's against the crank, so I'll pull my pieces off here. You want to orientate that, well, actually a little bit more assembly lube. Okay, we'll get some assembly lube. And again, our letters face the intake side of the engine, which is opposite the water pump opening. Put that on there. All right, time to torque these down. All right, 24 foot-pounds. All right, so we got 1 piston done. The next thing I'll do is go back to sizing my rings for cylinder number 2 and then in cylinder 3, putting them onto the pistons. I'm not going to show all that. Obviously, you got the idea from 1. You just repeat the process 2 more times. All right, so that's pretty much going to do it for this video. I'm going to carry on with these last 2 cylinders. And yeah, in the next video, I fully anticipate this engine will be completely assembled and ready to bolt onto the transmission. So think about subscribing if you haven't already so you know when that video comes out. I hope you're enjoying and learning something on rebuilding one of these little engines. It's a lot of fun, but anyway, thoughts and comments down below. Yeah, thanks a lot for watching and have yourself a great day.